Good evening and welcome to everyone. I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to tonight's session, which is the first of our Sustainable Renters Week as a part of Renew's expanded Sustainable House Day program. My name is Rob McLeod. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Renew. I'd like to begin our session tonight by acknowledging that I'm joining from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to elders past and present. People who are attending are joining from many traditional lands, and I would invite you to acknowledge the lands that you are joining from in the chat of the Zoom platform. Tonight, we will be kicking off our Sustainable Renters Week series with a great panel to explore the topic of how to get your landlord on board with improving the sustainability and efficiency of your home. We'll cover rebates and incentives, sustainability for renters, and tips for communicating with your landlord and making the case for a more energy efficient home as a renter. This is the first session of our Sustainable Renters Week, as I've said. And we're really, really grateful and pleased that this is a series that's supported by Natters, Your Home, Design for Place, Bank Australia, Zonin, Lighthouse Architecture and Science, Design Matters, Marybeck City Council and Banyule City Council. Thank you so much for making this important event possible. We're also joined tonight by an excellent panel of experts, and I'd like to take the time to introduce each of our speakers tonight to you now. First, we have Michaela Lang. Michaela is a behavioural researcher with a particular focus on improving the health and environmental impacts of poor quality housing. She recently completed a PhD examining the energy efficiency behaviour of small-scale private landlords. Prior to that, Michaela worked in local government for many years, leading community engagement on climate change mitigation and adaptation initiatives. So thank you so much for joining us. We also have Bernie Barrett. Bernie's Better Renting's Advocacy Coordinator. She has a background in consumer and lived experience advocacy and leadership. She most recently worked with peak bodies across health, mental health lived experience and LGBTQI+ advocacy in South Australia. Bernie has a strong focus on social justice and brings her passion for community-driven change and systemic advocacy together into her work at Better Renting. She is a 2022 Australian Progress Fellow. Thank you so much for joining us, Bernie. Finally, I'm so pleased to introduce Amy Frew. Amy joined Tenants Victoria as Managing Lawyer in August 2022. Previously, Amy was Deputy Managing Lawyer of the Civil Law Team in Alice Springs at the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency. Prior to her 4 years in the Northern Territory, Amy was a lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre. Amy has also previously worked in policy roles at the Victorian Government. So welcome, Amy. So it's time to get started. During our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to the panel, and thank you so much to everyone who has submitted a question when registering for the session. Your questions will inform tonight's discussion, and I'm hoping to directly pose some of them to our wonderful panel tonight. During the session, you can also put questions into Zoom's Q&A box and at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can this evening. You can also use the chat window on the bottom right of the screen to make general comments or to contact our behind-the-scenes team with any problems. So before we begin, it would be really great to get a sense of why you've decided to join us today. And to do that, we're going to run a quick poll. We invite you to choose a response that applies most to your situation. David, could you please launch the poll? Okay, I'm leaving just a moment to make sure that everyone has a chance to submit that. So very shortly, we'll be closing this in 3, 2, 1. Let's close the poll there. Okay. I'm not sure if the same thing is coming up on everyone's screen as it is on mine, but we have a really, really even split. 34% of people would be comfortable to ask their landlord to improve thermal efficiency and comfort of their home. 31% no. and 34% unsure. So I think that that is a pretty interesting picture of the situation facing renters and our audience tonight. I will be really curious to see whether that changes over the course of the evening. So let's move on to the questions. And as I say, these are some questions which are informed by the questions which have come to us by people registering for the evening. I would like to start by really laying out a bit about the state of the Australian rental market today. And so I'll start with a question to Bernie. How many of us are renters? And is there anything that we can say about the experience of being a renter in 2022?
Hi, thanks for having me. So in terms of how many of us are renters, I mean, I can't speak to the panel and the audience, but I know I'm a renter, and I know that about 1/3 of all households in Australia are renting. And while this number is increasing, it's also interesting to note that the demographic of renters in Australia has also been changing. So more and more families with children are renting, and many families belonging to generations of renters nowadays. You know, people are also spending longer as renters, raising families as renters, and also retiring as renters. And for older women in particular, it's quite common now to be re-entering the rental market at an older age. As for the state of renting, I mean, I don't think I'm going to shock anyone by saying it's not great. We have, you know, some of the lowest vacancy rates across all of Australia that we've seen, with skyrocketing rents. And really, we have some homes that are not doing their job to keep us safe from the outside world and all the trouble that that brings, so including poor health, higher emissions, and also a higher cost of living. So that's a cheery little snapshot of renting in Australia right now.
Cheerful indeed, cheerful indeed. Michaela, how prevalent is it that that people can take action about this, and that landlords will take action to improve the energy efficiency and comfort of homes?
We kind of do and don't know the answer to that question. So some things we do know, not just in Australia, but we're probably an extreme case for all the things that Bernie was just describing. But internationally, we know that rental properties perform poorly compared to owner-occupied properties, and often compared to social housing even. And we don't have, so a lot of countries have like a long-standing and quite comprehensive housing conditions, say like an annual survey or something like that. And we haven't really had that good data here. So we know landlords are not doing as much retrofitting as everybody else. We know they don't take up rebates as often, even, you know, when things would become free, they don't tend to do very much. So we know there's not a great deal happening. We asked a couple hundred landlords here in Victoria about 2 years ago now about their previous retrofit activity. And the numbers are they're probably a bit inflated, to be honest, but one of the things that it told us really clearly was the activity that is happening is changes that are good, but are not going to profoundly shift the comfort and energy bills of the people living in those houses. So lots of lighting upgrades, you know, shower heads, quite a lot of split systems going in, whether or not you even count those as an energy efficiency, but you know, on balance, we think they're good. We had them in, and that was pretty much all the activity. So you're not getting, you know, big solar arrays, which are so prevalent in residential in Australia. You're not getting. One of my co-authors is Dutch, and he kept saying, "Well, why aren't you asking about triple glazing and double glazing?" I was like, all renters in Australia know why we're not really. We did ask about it, but it's not happening, right? Those big, really. Those things that would really shift the housing market are not happening in rental properties, basically.
I think anyone who rents in Australia, if we took a poll, a similar poll to what we took at the start of this, asking, would you ask for double glazing or triple glazing, and what answer would you expect? I think we mostly know the answer of this, don't we?
Yeah.
Amy, what are some of the barriers that renters are facing when it comes to either energy efficiency or, I guess, more broadly, making sure that that homes are maintained, that maintenance happens, that that people's the conditions of people's rentals are actually upheld?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm joining from Jar Jar Warring land today. So just pay my respects to elders past and present. I think there's a number of barriers, and we've kind of already heard a few of them, but I think one big barrier is people don't always know their rights. They don't know what they're entitled to ask for, and then they don't know how to ask for it. And I think we're going to hear probably some really interesting information like from Michaela and Bernie around negotiation skills, but people often just don't know how to get started. And I guess the other thing is depending on which state and territory you're in, but all of them have some form of kind of no fault evictions, and that's really a disincentive for anyone to assert their rights even in the most casual way, because they don't want to be perceived as troublesome or problematic or costing the landlord money or whatever. So I think those are probably the main barriers that I would think of.
I saw a really great definition in a German paper where renters are much better protected over there. But they said, moving house is awful and it's expensive and it's really disruptive. So basically, as soon as you're living in a house, the landlord has a monopoly. So even with the best protections, which we don't have, there's such a power imbalance in that relationship.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of another barrier that we see quite regularly as well, is power imbalance, and also renters really do lack that agency over their home. I think many of us who are renters, we know what would make our homes more comfortable and more energy efficient, but we don't have the power to make those changes. And there's also a real lack of regulation around the country, around minimum standards for energy efficiency and other housing standards. So that also means that, landlords aren't making that choice proactively, because there's no one saying, hey, there's a minimum standard to this essential service that you're providing. And then, as Amy said, when regulations are put in place, people are often quite worried about asserting their rights, because they could be served with a no cause eviction or no fault eviction, because at the end of their lease, they could be seen as a bit of a pain in the butt and their landlord might not renew their lease. So there's a lot of risk and instability in being a renter trying to assert your rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenging things in having this conversation now is that so rental rights are upheld by different states. So it's something that's often the states lead it, and we're having a national conversation here. The rights that renters have in South Australia is different to Victoria, is different to Queensland, and that's something that we should bear in mind in this whole conversation. But as we are talking about the issue of minimum standards, it would be useful for us to lay out a little bit what actually are your rights when it comes to energy efficiency. And I can throw this to the whole panel. I know it's something that you're working very closely on, Bernie. So I'll throw to you, and then anyone, please feel free to jump in about specific rights. And Amy, I'll ask you about Victoria in a second as well.
It's a good question, because in a lot of states and territories, not a lot. Victoria is probably one of the leaders, as well as the ACT. So, Victoria recently implemented some changes, which means that rental homes are required to have a fixed heater in the main living room. That's also the same in Tasmania. There's a requirement for a heater. And in the ACT, they've recently announced a new minimum standard around insulation that will be in place from April next year. Elsewhere, ... we're kind of waiting for the conversations to continue. There's an RTA review happening in Western Australia, and we're hoping to see some energy efficiency standards put in place in the next year, hopefully. And there's also one being conducted in South Australia. So it's a little bit sparse at the moment, but there are some coming in.
Great, thank you. And yeah, Amy, was there anything that you'd like to add about the situation in Victoria and the rights that renters do have to energy efficiency or other features under the Victorian RTA?
Yeah, so I think we're pretty lucky in Australia by Australian standards in Victoria, and Bernie mentioned a couple of them, but the heaters I think going to be really important over winter, and also window coverings, which I think the Act sort of seems to frame it more in terms of privacy, but I think we all know that window coverings are also really important for like thermal efficiency and heat retention in the house. The other really important reform, which goes more to the healthy home, is the mold. Mold is now, and mold and dampness, now it's like an urgent repair. It has to be done quickly. It's in a minimum standard. So mold's a really tricky one because it often sometimes can go to like structural problems, but that's still the landlord's problem, But again, it's just that efficiency and that enforcement which makes it tricky. But I think it will be interesting to kind of watch this space because the reforms came in last year and then they're sort of being rolled out this year. So we're still in a transition period where things like electrical safety checks and efficiency of certain appliances, people are getting a bit of time to come on, comply with that, come on board with that. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, in the next couple of years, the real impact of that. And I'll just say briefly as well, this may be like a nerdy lawyer comment, but one interesting thing about the Federation is like different states move forward differently, and then the other states territories can kind of learn from that. So I guess hopefully the next state will come along and leapfrog over Victoria, and we'll all hopefully keep moving up the chain. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as a Victorian, I'm looking forward to when our government follows the lead that the ACT has just taken on insulation, and we should all be following that lead.
Absolutely.
So, Michaela, we obviously want to, so we're certainly pushing for stronger minimum standards that all rent landlords have to face, but we're also interested in what actually makes landlords take action and what will encourage landlords to take action even beyond the minimum standards that exist in the law. And this is something that that you've done a lot of work around. What can persuade landlords into retrofitting a home and or making even minor adjustments?
So I've got two answers to that question. So the first is what we thought we were setting out to study was landlords' retrofit decisions. So we'll go in, and when they've got this decision to make, what are they thinking? And what we found was that most of the time they were confused by the idea that there would be a decision about improving the energy efficiency of their home. I guess when it's a house that you live in, winter and summer both remind you that the thermal efficiency is not great. Electricity bills remind you that you might want to do something about energy efficiency. And the landlord doesn't have any of those touch points to the property. So there was just, there was no decision and no real thought of energy efficiency unless one of three things happened. This was from a study of only 20 landlords. So I'm not saying this is the only things that would ever happen, but the three prompts that we found that had created pretty much all of the activity that we could find were rebates, which is interesting because, as I already said, landlords don't respond to rebates as much as owner-occupiers do, but that was the number one thing, particularly if they had made something free. Direct requests from renters. And again, we've already talked about how difficult it is for renters to make those requests. And the only other one was if an appliance broke down, then they might replace it with something better. But there's lots of issues with that as well. And also appliances are pretty long lasting. So that's not going to be bringing around really kind of rapid change in the rental sector. So there's maybe potential there for the new legislation to create some prompts for, presumably means there is a section of landlords who would do something if they thought about it and there was a bit of an incentive attached to it, who are just not hearing or thinking about energy efficiency yet. And do you want my other answer to the question?
Yeah, look, that's, yeah, absolutely.
Give you a lecture about all of my research.
No. Oh, that's exactly what I want. It's so interesting that landlords aren't, even if a rebate does exist, they're not responding to it in the way that an owner or occupier is, and that to me is a really fascinating nut to crack.
Yeah. we often paint the landlords as kind of the bad guys, right? But even if they want to do the right thing, it actually is harder than getting something done in your own house. You can't just turn up there appropriately any day of the week, and you're a bit at arm's length, and you don't really know, what size or where, or so there are lots of kind of practical challenges. The other interesting thing we found about the rebates was those who had been prompted to do something, none of them had found out about the rebate in a way that was connected to the rental property. So it tended to be, we've had quite a lot of door knocking here in Victoria over the past, say, 10 years. It tended to be people had been offered something in their own home and gone, oh, maybe we could do that in the rental property. So they're getting nothing from property managers is what I'm saying. There's a really clear avenue there, and nothing is going through those communication channels as far as we can tell.
We've seen a lot of that as well. And I think when we talk to renters about, how can we get landlords to listen? Sometimes it is try and bypass your property manager, because, landlords are people. They care about, doing the right thing, generally speaking. And if they know that a tenant is suffering, they do generally have a desire to do something about that. And, we've done some polling with landlords previously, and there is a general support for minimum energy efficiency standards. There's obviously concern about costs and those sorts of things, but there is support. They do want to be offering a good service. And so, a barrier, again, as we were talking about before, is really getting that message convincingly to your landlord. So if you can potentially get the contact details of your landlord specifically, that's a good way to go around it. Do what you have to do. We also noticed, so we do a project called Renter Researchers, which is a citizen science project. And we had renters put a temperature tracker in their home and track minute by minute temperature data over summer and then again in winter. We also conducted some surveys and interviews to find out about the experience of those numbers, because it's so easy to dismiss a static number on a graph. But when someone tells you, yeah, it was 30 or 35 degrees in my home, I also don't have a functional air conditioner. I also have a newborn baby, and I was so scared about my baby overheating at night that for like days on end, I'm staying up through the night to make sure they're okay, moving fans around, checking the temperature, and it's playing like having a horrible toll on my mental health. That is a story. That is something that really pushes to the point. And anyone who hears that can empathize, and they care, and they know that something should be done to change that. So we've been doing this project now. We're in our third iteration of it at the moment. And we've actually encouraged renters to share that data with their landlords or their property managers and tell them a bit about what that experience is like. And we've seen some good results from this. So we had a renter in Tasmania who had some ceiling insulation installed. We've had a renter in Western Australia, in Queensland, in Victoria, have air conditioners installed in a main room or a bedroom of the house. So when people can actually see, oh my God, it is horribly cold or horribly hot in your home, they do care about that.
Yeah, it's compelling. I would really encourage people who haven't come across this report and the research that the Better Renting led on, Cold and Costly, and I think that my colleague has put that into the chat now. But I really do recommend having a read, and I challenge anyone who sees the stories of people through the course of this winter to tell me that we don't need to take action on our homes. So we've talked a bit about I guess one of the things that's coming through in this is that many landlords would be receptive to taking action if they even knew that this was happening, or if they knew that and I say many, not all, but certainly I think that there are many landlords that would be open to doing things. And I would be really interested to hear from our panelists, and I'll throw to you, Amy, but I'm also welcome others to tune in. How should What can you do to actually initiate that sort of a conversation? Are there resources? Is there support? How do you go about it?
There is actually, I think, a lot of resources on, and I apologise, I'm quite a Victorian specific knowledge, but like for Victoria, and I know other states and territories too, they have rental legal centres or, you know, better renting or whatever that can point you in the right direction too. So I think there's a kind of different tiers of there's stuff that the landlord must do under the law, and maybe it's a question of enforcing that. There's also things that you can do yourself, like modifications you can do that you can then remove at the end, and really there's no, you know, and then the other sort of type is where you could ask the landlord if you can pay for the modification. I'm not suggesting that you should, but sometimes that might be the best and quickest way for you to get a modification done. I just wanted to go back a little bit to the point before about speaking directly to the landlords. I think I agree that's a really good idea, but I think sometimes the property manager or real estate agent can be an ally. And it's really interesting. I went to a session recently with real estate agents, and they really saw part of their role as getting landlords to comply with their obligations. And they were sort of sometimes were like, we want to work with the tenant really to like say, you know, like if you threaten to go to VCAT in Victoria or NCAT or all the other, you know, civil and administrative tribunals, that might get the landlord's attention. So it's really interesting that their perspective was, you know, of course, they would always paint themselves in a very good light. But I just think it's worth working out who your best ally is and starting that conversation in that direction as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's the role of real estate agents or managers is a really, really interesting one. In preparing for this session and in our work more generally, we're really thinking about which real estate agents are taking action on sustainability. I would actually encourage anyone who's looking for a good business idea to go and set one up, because I think that there's a real opportunity there for a green real estate agency in this country.
And I just say one first.
I'll go to Amy, then Michaela, then
really briefly, just to finish off, because and again, just to return to Victoria, but we've got these new electrical and gas safety checks that have come in as part of the new standards, and I think that's a really good time because I know like landlords are going to have to spend some money upgrading things. That could be a really good time to make that intervention and say, hey, you're going to upgrade anyway. Like, here's this option that's going to be so much more sustainable in the longer term. And equally with other times, I guess, is picking your time. And if they are having checks or inspections, that might be the time to, if they're going to spend some money anyway, they may as well spend it in a way that's advantageous to the renter as well. So something to keep in mind, I think.
Absolutely. Michaela.
That would definitely line up with what some of the landlords told us as well. But I just thought, while we're interested in property managers, although they're not the topic of tonight, we got the landlord's perspective of the property managers, and they felt that they were just not there. Like they are the expert voice on most things about the property, but when it came to energy efficiency in any form, they weren't a trusted source of information yet, which didn't really matter because none of them had talked or heard anything about energy efficiency from their property managers. So we were looking at, all right, who is establishing what is normal for a landlord? And in not even mentioning it, effectively the property managers were saying, well, doing nothing is normal. Some of the landlords had also been told that they were really unusual because they wanted to be responsive to their renters. You know, other landlords don't do anything. So setting this really damaging social norm. And the one landlord that I spoke to who had proactively asked about solar was told, oh, why would you bother? Don't do anything. Just sit on the property for 20 years and then sell it. So there's probably the ones who are turning up, probably a little bit the same as the landlords, the ones who are turning up to the sessions, you know, have real potential to make some change, but I think they're still in the minority.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Michaela, as well. And I've put it in the chat, but we have so many landlords who contact us and say, I want to do the right thing. Like, I want to make sure that the people living in this home are comfortable. I just don't know really where to get started because it isn't seen as the done thing. In a really practical, a practical piece of information as well, it might be, you know, obvious, but if you're recording all of this information, like if you're having really bad days and really hot temperatures, really high bills, like it's really good to record this information, write it down, include it in an email. You know, obviously don't just make a phone call, but just the practical things is just sharing that in a written way, and having a really well recorded, documented experience of what's happening in your house. And I think from our perspective, something that does work is sharing your story. You don't have to be unbiased in your own experience. You can say, like, this is making me sad, this is making our family uncomfortable, this is making us unhealthy. You know, we have heard so many stories of renters who, this one always stands out to me. Last summer, one of our renter researchers woke up in the middle of the night, it was so hot, and they walked out into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and they noticed their son was asleep on the kitchen floor because it was the only room in the house that was cool enough for them to sleep in, because they just weren't able to sleep comfortably. And I think, again, if you're sharing your stories and your experiences, and as renters, we tend to all have these, makes a big difference. And again, landlords are humans. Real estate agents are humans. I shouldn't be laughing as I say that. It's not a joke. It's just I shouldn't have to quantify that. We're people working with each other, and we do care at a heart-to-heart level. We care about that.
And that's what our research showed probably more strongly than anything, was that pretty much the only thing, when we looked back at when landlords had actually done something, because we think that's more accurate than what they think they might do in the future, pretty much the only thing that really played into that decision to make them retrofit was concern for tenants' comfort, which in our Statsy piece was a bundle of a whole bunch of things, but basically it came down to thermal comfort. More than anything, that was what motivated retrofitting. And environmental concerns didn't. Some of them thought would in the future, but hadn't ever in the past. I noticed a couple of people in the chat saying they're worried about rent going up, which is particularly at the moment a very valid concern. And of course, there's no guarantees on an individual basis, but we didn't find any retrofitting. We didn't find any correlation with being able to put up the rent based on retrofitting. And when we asked about the role that played in their decisions, even for something quite big like solar, for one thing, the landlords didn't really think that it would go up enough to kind of make that money back, but they also just weren't that motivated by it. Like, making quite a lot of money anyway, a bit extra on top, it just wasn't part of their decision making at all. If they had a financial equation there, it was more around keeping the renter in the house for longer. So it's actually, I think you said before, they want to provide good service. Like, good service is also good business.
It's not in their interest for their renter to move on and have a vacant home either, right?
Usually not. It's quite expensive. You've got to pay for advertising, and you also have that income generating asset just sitting there, not generating any income. I usually say at least a month.
I think also to that point about rent going up, something that people don't realize is just how expensive it is to have an energy deficient home. The money that you're spending to heat and cool your home is so much higher when you're living in a substandard deficient home. And so when those retrofits are made, especially insulation and all of those sorts of things, the amount of money that you will save on your energy cost is incredible. And I know Renew does a lot of work around this with modelling, but it's quite staggering just how much can be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. And better renting as well. And I will take the chance to say that we're about to go into some questions from participants. Hot off the press, tomorrow we'll be actually releasing a new report that shows the impact of poorly performing homes for renters. And we're looking at, and with energy prices going up, we're looking for rental homes without insulation, to heat a space in most rental homes in most cities. The cost of it could go up by a few $100s a year over the next couple of years if Treasury predictions are to be right, and renters can't, this is going to have a really, really big impact on so many people, and something that we really, really need to tackle. Just before we do go to those questions, I do want to ask generally to the panel about just any practical tips for making this request. So really, if you do want to ask your landlord to take this sort of action, are there are there particular things that you can point landlords to, for example, incentives or concessions insofar as those would be beneficial to them or, influential to them? Are there resources that you can draw on in making that approach? Are there any things that people should know before they're making that sort of an approach?
I think, again, just practically speaking, is write things down. Having a written record of things is so important. We forget things. We forget what it feels like to be really hot. It's such an objective experience. And so writing those things down is really important. In terms of renters being able to access information, and that's really vital in telling your landlord what it's been like in your home. You can buy those sorts of like temperature trackers and really see what it's actually getting to, like the temperatures that are, either dropping to or going to in your home. Some libraries in different states actually have energy efficiency kits that you can borrow and take home and do some checks. I know that that's available in some Victorian libraries and in South Australia. I could check others. I'd have to take that a note to get back to people, but you can actually just walk down to the library and get a fancy kit and check, some of the measures of your home. And I think that, I don't know all of these rebates, but in South Australia, there are definitely some schemes. So there's the Retailer Energy Productivity Scheme, or REPS, and that gives rebates to people who are doing those energy efficient retrofits. So there's lots of different things that people can access. Some of them can be accessed, I think most of them, have to be accessed by the owner of the home, but you can at least get some of that information together. And if you make it easier for landlords to act on it, it's going to be more likely that they'll do something. If they have to go out and do all the research themselves, it just seems like more of a pain. But if you provide some of that to them, it's definitely helpful.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, look, let's jump into some of the questions that we have had from the audience. And these have come in, as I say, both before the session started and also during the course of this chat. So I'll start off with one that, so first of all, what issues might arise when asking for replacement of specific appliances? Are there any issues that people should be aware of? For example, if requesting the replacement of a gas or electric hot water system to an efficient heat pump hot water system. Are there things that people should be aware of when making these sorts of requests, or any implications that would come from that? I'm happy to throw to anyone who wants to jump on that one.
Maybe I'll start and then throw to Amy for a more legal perspective on it. But one of the issues with replacing appliances is we have a very strong done thing of like for like replacements. So if something's coming to the end of its life, it's just easier and more clear cut to put in exactly what was there before, which obviously is not usually the most efficient option. So I would say if things are starting to look a bit wobbly, I would be flagging that there might be better options before that decision needs to be made fast, because quick turnover is one of the ways that they provide good service to tenants, but a quick changeover means you get exactly what you had before, because there's not time to work out what else should go in instead. And then that's probably also the time to flag rebates. And just building on what Bernie said about rebates, there are varying levels of complexity in applying for the rebates and in the rebate schemes. Some of them think they can overcome some of the problems in rental properties by putting in like delayed payments, or the renters contributing to the payments and things like that. Landlords tend to just want the simplest even if it costs them a bit more as a rule. That's key.
Yeah, so simple and clear information. Yeah.
I don't know if there are like any specific legal considerations, although of course any kind of installation around like electric or gas has to be done by a suitably qualified person, not some mate down the road or whatever, which is a whole other different repairs topic. But I think doing your I think that kind of combination of what the other presenters have talked about is that the human story is like such a powerful and so compelling, I think, a lot of the time, plus the kind of money part of the story too. So like we actually got a new hot water system here recently. I did a bunch of research and called up and asked some questions. And if you're replacing, we had a really crappy old electric hot water system. So there's actually quite a lot of rebates for that because this is Victorian context, but I assume it's the same in other places. They wanted people to upgrade their hot water service, so they are, but maybe the landlord's not aware of that. So that might be telling them why they need it and then telling them how easy it is. And it's an investment in it's their asset. They're investing in what, I think it can make good financial sense as well as good kind of like human sense.
The landlords often assume that rental properties are exempted from the rebate program. So even just putting a link to the information that it's available to them.
Yeah, I did. Oh, sorry, you go, Benny.
No, sorry. Thank you. I think in terms of like where else you find that information, generally this information is in your Residential Tenancy Act of your state or territory. In South Australia, we also have like the Housing Improvement Act. But also, in New South Wales, you have like the Tenants Union New South Wales. Obviously in Victoria, you have Tenants Victoria. Queensland, you also have a number of you've got Tenants Queensland or Secure, other places like that. Generally, you'll be able to find on a government website the summary of the obligations of renters and landlords. So you should be able to find that by doing a Google search within, your state or territory. Just some really practical ways to find that information.
Fantastic. Yeah, so practical and yeah, excellent. I have a question through the chat now. So as a landlord, we like to be able to get energy assessments that provide us with options to improve the tenant's comfort. Also a business that offers to actually do the improvements, making it easy for us to get the work done. I feel like these are maybe gaps, but I'm really interested in people's reflection on this. Is it easy to get your home assessed, with and actually get some practical advice about what are the steps, what are the things that need to happen to the home to make it more thermally efficient? Michaela, could I throw that one to you? What sort of things can people do? How can you find out what you actually need to do in your home?
Yeah, there are assessment companies who can do that now. And they would probably be surprised and delighted to be invited to do an assessment of a rental property, because I don't think, we certainly didn't see any evidence of landlords asking for that kind of information. But we definitely saw that landlords who knew about what conditions were like in their properties were retrofitting to much higher levels than those who didn't. It is hard. And how do you know what it's like in a property that you don't live in? So it's a really smart way to go. If we want to go Vic-centric again, sorry, other states and territories, but there is also the Victorian Residential Energy Efficiency Scorecard, which they did some testing on rental properties, and I think they certainly would be, as able to do a rental property as any other kind of property. And so would other energy assessors. I just don't think they get asked to do it.
Yeah, okay. But that's a really good pathway for landlords who are considering taking this action. And I will just take the chance as well to flag some of the other sessions which are coming up this week, which will be really relevant to that. On Thursday night, for anyone who is a landlord or wanting to take action on the home that they rent out, there will be a specific session for landlords seeking to take that action, providing hopefully some tips and practical advice around that. So do keep an eye on the schedule for that. I have a question has come in during the session. Is there a place where tenants can share hints that are within tenants' rights? I'm thinking about managing your rental ventilation and similar issues. So is there anywhere that you can get tips from other renters or I guess advice from other people who are going through this process? Once again, I'll throw that to anyone who'd like to take it on.
I mean, a bit of self-promotion here, but Better Renting does have a few Facebook groups. So depending on what state or territory you're in, we have like Adelaide Renters or Renters in Canberra, Canberra Renters. So there are some Facebook groups for sure. We'll also be sharing some information publicly soon about something called the Renter Centre, which will kind of be a collective of renters who can come together and share ideas. So we've definitely done a bit of that building. But again, I'd really encourage you to look at what grassroots organisations are on the ground, including your, renters unions, tenants, legal services, and that in your community. You might see that there are some groups happening there. Or, you could start, if you're not seeing something, you could start something yourself as well. Like this is something that could be really cool for you to do. Probably a lot of renters near you and around you who would also like to share your woes and your tips and your tricks. So you could also consider starting something yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. Would love to see more and more groups springing up. It's such a critical pathway. Are there any other places that people would like to mention there, or I'll jump through to the next question? I will do that, and bear with me everyone while I'm looking at 3 boxes all at once during Q&A sessions. It's always the way, isn't it? So I have a question about minimum standards for renting. So can you see minimum standards improving as more Australians are forced into renting? I would, once again, this is something that I know everyone on the panel has a strong interest in. Bernie, this is something that you're working very, very closely on. Can you see prospects for changing for more minimum standards on this issue?
I think that the national conversation around standards of rental homes has been improving. And I think that we're talking more and more about renting than I've seen before. And I think, as we see every other day, there's a story about the rental crisis. We also hear more and more about what people are experiencing in these homes. So I know I see so many stories about people experiencing mold and, just really poor quality homes. So I think there's a lot of momentum on this issue. And as Rob was talking about earlier, there is also a national framework that is being released early next year around minimum energy efficiency standards for rental homes. And that will then go to all of the states and territories to take up and to do something with. Part of what we do at Better Renting is we help coordinate the Healthy Homes for Renters collaboration, which is explicitly working on this area of minimum standards for renters and working with states and territories, their governments and also organisations in those states to move this issue. And we do that by bringing renters to the centre of that conversation. So I think this is the time basically. And I think the more and more that people engage with, events like this and we hear about it, we talk about it, the further along that moves, which is, another great reason that Renew is doing this tonight.
Indeed. Thank you, Bernie. I have got a couple of questions coming in about solar. So one person says, tried to get the landlord on board with solar, taking advantage of the grant available in Victoria for landlords, but they weren't interested. I even offered a small increased rent payment, even though I knew this shouldn't be necessary. And also did other things. So alternatively, I installed honeycomb blinds with their approval at my own cost. That seems to be a pretty telling, that is a very telling situation, and I think it's one that a lot of us relate to, so thank you for the comment. I'll open that up to just ask the panel about the question of, we've talked mostly about thermal efficiency and the health of homes, but there are other things like solar or electrifying homes that are also an important part of this conversation. Would anyone like to touch on what the experience of connecting to solar is for a renter? And Michaela?
This probably doesn't answer any of the questions, but we found something interesting about solar, so I'll share it. And that was when we looked at what landlords had done in the past, how much retrofitting, and what they thought they would do in future. We found things that had been retrofitted pretty commonly in the past. Other landlords who hadn't already had those things were pretty willing to do them in the future, and they tended to be the cheap things. And then things like double glazing that are expensive and not so common here, they hadn't been done much in the past, and they weren't very willing to do it in the future. Solar was a bit the exception. So there was pretty low rates of solar, but quite high rates of willingness to retrofit. So compared to most other significant things, it seems like there is a bit of an opportunity there. Obviously not for everyone. Sorry, whoever asked that question. I'm sure that's also not a really rare experience either. And then when we interviewed landlords, solar it's the thing that's top of mind for people who don't give a great deal of thought to energy. Solar is what they think of, and you can also see it, like if you go and do a 15-minute inspection to decide where you want to apply to rent, you can see the solar panels, and the benefit is very concrete, whereas the thermal comfort benefits and the cost benefits, they're huge, but they're very variable depending on how the renters are using the house. The solar is generating the amount it's generating regardless of who's living there. And I think the market's valuing it a bit. So that there is an opportunity, but it's still a hard answer.
Something that you can see and touch and feel, isn't it? It's so it's such a critical thing, and much harder when it comes to things like insulation, which are just simply, even though they have a massive effect, they're hidden. You know, some people might have heard of this, but a few years ago, Environment Victoria did a study where they sent in a bunch of secret shoppers to open for inspections for rental homes, as well as some homes for sale, and asked the real estate agents, what features of energy efficiency does this have in the home, or can you tell us the star rating? And 8% of people who asked a question got any sort of answer at all about this. 90% of the time, the real estate agents couldn't say anything. But what we do know, even within the 8%, you're much more likely to get a response about solar than anything else. And solar is the one which people see. But it goes to show that people, it's hard to get this information.
We call it the sexy solar. People are only really interested in solar.
So energy efficiency, sadly, probably doesn't fit the bill sometimes.
I would also just add though as well, like I saw Sarah's comment about, not being able to upgrade the stovetop, and also the question around solar, and that can be really disheartening, and it makes renters feel like they won't ask for things again. And I just think this is still your home. Revisit the topic, maybe think about what more information you can bring. If there have been changes in standards introduced, you can point to that. So I would say just don't stop trying, don't give up. And I know it can be disheartening, but do try again.
The other thing I would say is, particularly maybe to the third of people, or the 2/3 of people who are like, no way I'm asking, or I'm not sure if I would ask for improvements to my property. Think about leaving a gift for the next renter when you leave the property and you're not dependent on that landlord anymore. Think about saying, hey, you know why I'm moving out? It was freezing in winter and my kid got sick. That's why I'm moving out.
Yeah, and making sure that they hear that is critical.
You can.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question here. We are coming up, so pretty soon we'll be coming to 7:30, at which point we'll wrap up. But I do have a couple of extra questions which I hope to get to. So I live in one question from Michelle. I live in a rented townhouse on Gold Coast. I have a large water tank here. However, the pump burned out and the landlord doesn't want to pay the $6,000 to replace or repair it. So now I'm just down to town water. The electrician said water is cheaper than electricity to run the pump. And so how can I persuade the owner to replace the pump so that I can use rainwater again? This is coming less into energy efficiency as to water and conservation. Would anyone have any comments to that question?
I think it's similar to when you kind of ask for any of those upgrades and changes to be made. Again, this isn't an upgrade, it's a repair. And I think you could also, speak to the rental legal centre where you are, because I believe, if it's in your lease as part of the condition of the home, there may be an obligation or an expectation for that to be repaired if it was there when you moved in. I'm seeing Amy nod, so I feel like I'm not saying the wrong thing. I think I think as well, it's, talking about like sharing the overall experience of why that's so hard for you. And if you are spending so much more money now and those sorts of things, including that information as well, so that they can kind of get the whole picture, because they might think, oh, you still have water though. What do you mean? We're still meeting an obligation. It's not like you are cut off from a water. But if you paint the full picture of what you're also missing out on as a result of not having it, that may help you as well. I'm not sure if Amy has anything more to add around repairs being made to homes, but I think that what I said was true. No.
I think I'm not going to venture into other states' law, but one thing I just wanted to spruik not spruik, but in Victoria and possibly in other states as well, if there's a repair that you need to get done, whether it's a pump or really any other thing, and your landlord is being, if it's an urgent repair, that's one thing, but if it's a non-urgent repair, Consumer Affairs Victoria will actually come to your home free and write a free report about like whatever the repair is that you want to get done. And then obviously you can just tell your landlord that, but if the landlord still isn't like coming to the party, then that would form part of your like case if you took it to the civil administrative tribunals. I don't think many people know about that. And I'll also just say it also goes with rent increases. So these are free services that are available, which I certainly didn't realise until I took on this role, and I was a renter for a really long time in Victoria. So it's worth having a look in the different areas, other free things that might be available that you can use as kind of advocacy tools to let get landlords to do the right thing.
That's great. I didn't know about that one. That's really good to know about. I'll take the chance to ask one more question before coming back to the panel. And this has come in from Robert in the audience regarding. This is about Victoria, but there might also be some relevance to other states as well. So the Energy Victoria website is really, really opaque regarding the opportunities for landlords, and there have been a lot of changes lately. Is there a source of information that Robert or others can put to their landlord and agent about the energy? So in this case, the Victorian Energy Upgrades program, what hurdles exist for landlords to register the Victorian Energy Upgrades? Because we have a national audience, I'll sort of broaden that out to, are there places, where can you send landlords if you need to, resources to say how we can make it most simple would be really useful. We're hearing through the course of this, and are there places that we can send them in that respect? And so that's a really long way of asking that question. Michaela.
I don't have the answer to your question for the national audience, but specifically for Robert, we spoke to landlords who had accessed VEU and no problems. It was just like you would access it for an owner-occupied property. But the bigger question of where there's a good compilation of information, I don't know.
And I think that's because it is so different in all states and territories. And I'm in South Australia. We don't have a tenants union, so we don't have a real central place to get information that you can share. That's why I would always recommend contacting those community legal services, who generally will have a tenants team. Or, in South Australia, we have Rent Right, and there are other places in other states. I would also say that VCOS in Victoria have done some really great work around the minimum standards and compiling all of that information together, if you just want to find some of that information to share. But I would say, you know, look at Tenants Union New South Wales, look at, you know, Rent Right in South Australia, Shelter WA, Shelter New South Wales. There's so many organisations, NTCOS if you're in the Northern Territory, Tenants TAS. There's generally a place in each state that either has the information or you can get in touch with to find that advice.
Absolutely. And what we will also do is make sure that after all of this, and it might not be immediately or tomorrow, but it might be down the track if you've RSVP'd for this, we can certainly commit to sending you the resources which Renew has put out in the past. And some of that information is in there. So we look forward to doing that. We are up at 7:30, which is the end of our session. And so I would like to take the chance to thank our panelists so much. Before I let them go, though, I will put them on the spot to finish up and just ask everyone on our panel if there's one thing that you would like people to take away from this session, or one thing that you would like people to know about the issue and getting your landlord on board with these changes. What is that one thing that you would like people to take away from the session now? I can pick on someone to put them on the spot first, or if I've got any volunteers. Bernie, you're off mute.
I'm happy to go. I think I've got two pieces of advice. So one is for renters, and I think that is just to expect more. We live in these, you know, houses that are our homes, and it's really important to remember that you do have that right to enjoyment and comfort within your home, and you shouldn't simply accept, you know, a roof over your head as being a good enough reason to live in a home that is making you unhealthy and is costing a lot of money to live in. So I would really encourage you to find out more about this issue. Again, connecting with those local organisations, sign up to Renew's, you know, newsletters. All of the people that are here today have some great resources and information. So just you know, engage with this information more, and maybe contact the Tenants Union if you have one. For landlords, if you're interested in this work, firstly, I commend you. I think it's fantastic. And I think you set a really good tone for other landlords and for what we can see happening here in Australia. You can also sign up as a landlord to the Healthy Homes for Renters collaboration. We would love to engage with more landlords on this. So I just say to you, you know, you can kind of set the tone for what we expect of landlords. And I really commend you for being here today.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you so much. I will throw to you, Amy.
I think Bernie's really covered the field with all the amazing tips. I guess kind of, you know, as a lawyer, I guess maybe just the angle of find out what your rights are. And I think there are resources, different websites like Tenants Union New South Wales, Tenants Victoria, or the Consumer Affairs websites also have lots of information as well. You, I guess you don't know what you're entitled to until you have a look. And I think, you know, we've heard tips tonight about good ways of asking and start of the conversation. And I think it's worth, even if you start small and just say, could I have a more efficient, I don't know, shower head or something? And then, you know, maybe that's going to grow the conversation. So, yeah, I think find out where your rights are and how you can go about getting them. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amy. And finally, I'll throw to you, Michaela.
So I'll loop back to what we've talked about a little bit and say, pitch the comfort, discomfort, heat, cold angle. If you're wanting changes to your home, that's the most effective angle that you can take, unless there's, you know, free money, ideally both. But that having a home that keeps you healthy and able to pay your bills shouldn't rely on what's effectively the kindness of strangers, because most landlords don't know the people living in their home. So get behind mandatory minimum standards if you get an opportunity. We need to advocate in this space.
Absolutely, 100% behind it. And I'd like to commend everyone who's on this panel on the work that you've all been doing to actually make some of these things reality and to protect people's rights or to build on people's rights. So thank you so much. So look, thank you to our panel for your expertise and for sharing it with us tonight. It's been a real pleasure to join everyone and to have this discussion with so many of you. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for tuning into the session and for your questions. We hope it's been valuable for you. Please note that there are 3 more sessions in this series, so please visit the Sustainable House Day website to check out the details and register if you'd like to tune in. You can buy tickets for individual events or a series pass, which gives you access to all of the upcoming events. There are also free tickets available during the course of this week. We've also introduced an annual pass for all Sustainable House Day events, which means each event costs around $3 over the course of the extended program. Don't forget, members of Renew receive free or discounted tickets, and we always have an allocation of free places for those experiencing financial difficulty. Thank you once again to everyone, and good night. We will see you over the course of the rest of the week.